Alright, what's up guys? This is Ryan from Elevate Security. Now, in this video, I'm going to be covering a very essential skill for the OSCP and just pen testing in general. And that is the topic of file transfers. Particularly in this video, I'm going to be covering Linux file transfers. And if you're interested in Windows file transfers and all the options you have available there, definitely stick around for future content. I will be creating that, but I really wanted to silo these. That way you guys don't get mixed up, don't get confused. So feel free to follow along. I would recommend adding these to your notes for sure, because keep in mind, even though I'm going to be listing these off, I'm consulting my own notes. Some of these I don't really use so much, but it's nice to have as many tools in your toolbox in case one methodology isn't available for whatever reason. Then you have another way to do it in another way. And if you have like about 3 to 5 different ways to transfer files on Linux and on Windows, then you're pretty much going to be covered in all scenarios. This is information that let me tell you, I really wish that I had this when I was first starting going for OSCP and first learning this stuff. It would have saved me a lot of time, a lot of headache. And that's what I aim to do for you guys in these videos. So if you're enjoying this content so far, please go ahead and like the video and subscribe. Definitely helps me out quite a bit and also gives me good feedback on, you know, if you guys are enjoying this content or if you would prefer maybe some different content, right? So that's the way that I use to gauge that kind of feedback. So yeah, please take those actions if you feel so inclined. Now, without further ado, let's get into these Linux file transfers. Now, let me first explain what is the situation where you want to transfer files, right? So when I talk about file transferring here, what I'm talking about is, obviously, the course is pen testing with Kali Linux. That's what the lab is for the OSCP. And in the OSCP, you're going to be using Kali Linux, right? So this is my attacker's machine. Now, a lot of times, when you get a shell on the box, there'll be a Linux system. And first of all, you need to, once you connect and get your shell on that system, you're going to want to eventually transfer a file. Maybe you want to run a priv checker. You need to upload that onto the system. You need to transfer that over. Maybe there is a file that has some pretty juicy information, so you want to bring that over to your system, right? So you can process it on your end. Maybe there's some hashes that you grab. You want to crack them offline with something like John. Well, then that's where you would transfer that file to your system, so you can do that locally, right? So there's so many different contexts in which you want to transfer files between your attacker's system and the target system, in this case, a Linux box, right? So I've created a little lab environment here in my virtual box. So obviously I have my attacker's machine here, the Kali Linux box, and then I also have this Ubuntu box, and I went ahead and already created a connection, right? This is a shell that I have, right? This isn't my default Kali system, as you can see. This is it, root at Kali, right? So this one is my Ubuntu box. I got a shell on it. So for sake of scenario, let's say you have the shell already, as I do here, and now you want to, quite simply, transfer files over. Now, the first context is you want to upload something from your machine to the target system, right? So in this case, let's go to my documents folder. Let's see, where am I at right now? Okay, let's go to home Kali documents. So let's go ahead and create a file. We'll pretend hackme.sh, right? So let's say we have like a shell script there that we want to get this over to the target system. Now, the most simple way to do this is to host this on your system as a web server, and then you can use the shell that you have on your target system to request that file, to pull it down, right? Now, the most tried and true method, the most classic way to do this is to use what all of these Linux systems have built in, which is the Apache web server, right? So I normally don't transfer it this way, but this is one option that you can do, right? You can do service Apache to start, I believe is the command. Okay, so now that I have that started, when you run that and you start your Apache 2 web server, that is by default going to be at var www HTML. So if I go to var www HTML, this is where it should be hosting, right? So we started this up, so I think I should be able to see that if I go there. In fact, let me just do that to test this out, make sure I'm not mistaken here, right? Yep. So yeah, we're running this local web server here, and that's why I saw the Apache 2 Debian default page when I went there. So I was just confirming that. So it's hosting it here. So if I go back, what I want to do, I'll copy this script over to var www HTML. Okay, so now when I go back there, I can see, and this is here. Now it's kind of an empty file, but you get the idea, right? So what I'm gonna do, if say I wanted to transfer this, right? That's the first thing I do is move it over here, and then I go to my shell, and there's a few ways I can do it from here. Now I just need to pull it down, right, from the server that I'm hosting it on, from my attacker's machine. Now, one way that I could go about doing that, the way I prefer to do it, to be honest, is just to do a wget, right? So I would do wget my IP address, 1.105, I believe, and it's called hackme.sh. So 103 is actually what it is. So yeah, I run the wget command here, and yeah, then it pulls it down just like that, and there you go, we have it. So here, let me delete that for now. Let's go with a different method of file transfer. And all right, yeah, I added some data to the file just now off camera. I think that was why I was having some issues before a second ago. So what I did, I'll show you what I did. I went ahead and modified this file here, and just added some bogus data in here, because before it was empty, so it wasn't transferring anything with curl. So that's probably not an issue that you're going to run into, because if you're transferring something on a, one of these like OSCP boxes, or like, CTF, or in the real world, there's going to be data in the file you're transferring most likely, so you're not going to run into this issue. But if it's empty, it looks like it doesn't transfer. But now that I put some data in here, I can show you the curl way. 192.168.1.103 hackme.sh. If we do this, we could write it to hackme.sh. And there you go. You see that it transferred all the lines in there. So yeah, that's just one way that you can go about it. To be honest, I don't really use the curl way as much, but it is an option. It's good to know multiple ways to do different things. Everyone has their own methodology, their own way of doing things, and it's just good to be aware. I'll show you now the way that I like to do the file transfers. So the way I like to do it, and to illustrate this, I'm going to explain the next scenario of, we have a file on the system that we want to transfer to our attacking box, And there's different ways to do this. There's always Python FTP as well. There's so many different ways to do these things, really. But the way that I normally do this is I will just host a Python web server. So I do Python -m, simple HTTP server, and whatever port you want to run it on. Let's do it on port 80 if we have, we might not have permissions. Let's see. Yeah, we don't have permissions. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you want to use this on a common port like port 80, 53, etc., that normally requires elevated privileges. But I can just run it on the default port 8000 if I don't specify anything, you see. So now what I'm doing is I'm hosting it using a Python web server. So what I can do is I can go here and I can use one of the methods above to grab that file. So I could use curl like I just showed you. I'm going to use wget because that's my preferred way of doing things. You got to give it the victim box, which is the 105 IP address, and the name of the file. In this case, we want file.txt. So if we're running on port 8000, then we got to specify, because otherwise it assumes that it's port 80. So what we're going to want to do is add this 8000 here. And now we're able to get the file. Yeah, little things like that that'll get you sometimes. But yep, now I have that file that I just add some bogus data to. Yeah, so we can actually use Netcat to do a file transfer as well, believe it or not. So the way we would do that is we would start by setting up a listener on our Kali box. So we could do like -L for listen, and we'll be listening on port, I don't know, let's say 999, and then the file that we want the output to be saved to. So we'll call it netcat file.txt. And so now we have that listener going. So then on the victim machine, let's say we come up to our victim machine up here, and let's say we want to transfer that file.txt, right? So we would use netcat there with the -W flag and then 5, and then the IP address to our Kali box, which is the 103 address. And then we would also, of course, include the port 999, and then the file that we want to transfer. So in this case, file.txt is what's going to be passed through there. All right, so now it wrote, and if we look at our netcat file.txt, we see the contents of that file.txt file. So that's how you can actually transfer files using Netcat. Now, the last method I want to cover, now we'll keep in mind there's also FTP is an option, right? You could do FTP with like an FTP client, or there's a Python way to do it, which I'm going to cover that in the Windows file transfer video. So don't worry if that's something that you're interested in. Know that it works on Windows and Linux, so whichever way that you happen to be doing things, we'll cover that one there. And there's one final method that I wanted to touch on before I end the video. And I don't have things, unfortunately I didn't have my environment set up for this properly to demo it live, but honestly, it's a way that I think I've only ever done once, to be honest. And chances are you won't actually need this ever. But if you do, nice to have it in your toolbox, as I was mentioning earlier. So that is using SCP, which, if you're not familiar with SCP, basically stands for Secure Copy. And basically, it's the SSL version of FTP, right? If you think about FTP, it's a pretty old legacy protocol, and it's not the most secure. So SCP was created essentially to function the same way, but be encrypted, and basically it requires you to have a login credential, as you see there. And then from your attacker's machine, so from the Kali box, I would run SCP, the user, so like that self-made user, at the IP address of that Ubuntu box, and then the file name, and then this is for current directory, because by default, the location for the file is in the user's home directory. But if the file wasn't there, then you can give it the specific path where that file is. And you run that. And if they both have SCP on the system and everything's set up correctly, you have the login credential. then you'll be able to grab the file and transfer it that way. So yeah, I hope this video was of help to you guys. This is just several different ways of doing the same thing. Because what you'll find in OSCP is not always one way will work every time. Although I will say that using that Python hosting method and wget, you're going to be able to transfer, I would say, like 95% of things on Linux that way. It almost always works. Python is almost always installed on, well, you just need Python running on the box that you're hosting it. So if that's your Kali machine, well, of course, you're going to have Python. And if you're trying to transfer from that machine to yours, maybe possibly they don't have Python, especially if it's a Windows system. But then there's other ways to do it, right? PowerShell is what comes to mind there normally. But we'll cover the Windows one in another video, like I was saying. But yeah, just using the Python way of hosting things in wget, that's going to basically work 95% of the time anyways. But I wanted to give you guys some other ways just in case you have something to turn to if that's not working. So yeah, maybe you guys have your own ways that I didn't cover in this video. And if so, let me know down in the comments section below. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know down there as well. And one last thing I'll say is if you have any questions upcoming for me, I'm going to be doing a Q&A video on my experiences in the OSCP and answering any of your questions that have to do with OSCP as well. So drop them down in the comments section below and I'll get them added to the list. And I will see you guys in the next video.